Everything you do affects the emotional state of your customer. And everything you do determines what your customer believes about your whole organization. You see, how you respond to your client or your customer, how you look at them, what you do and what you say can make them feel happy or sad, relieved or frustrated. And how you respond to your customer can make them think your organization is helpful and friendly, incompetent, you know what I'm talking about, or expert. You see, you have an awful lot of power. The problem is, most people never consciously learn a strategy for using that power to have a positive impact, for influencing and persuading. So let's look at the power principles. In order to get someone to go somewhere with you, you need to meet them where they are and not just pretend they're already where you want them to be. You see, most people, and they're not aware of doing this, they use the same strategies they use to convince themselves on other people. And then they're shocked and dismayed when those other people don't jump onto the bus and go wherever they want them to go. That's kind of like doing this. It's a person standing at their bus stop, looking way down the road at the other person's bus stop and going, "Oi, you should be over here. What are you doing over there? It's obvious. Why aren't you on that bus? You gotta be here." Now, instead, if you went to the other person's bus stop, their motivational bus stop, their emotional bus stop, their psychological bus stop, and from their bus stop, if you were able to invite them on the bus, so you can't really force anyone to get on the bus, but you can invite them on the bus, and then you can take them somewhere useful for them and somewhere useful for you. So that's what we're going to do today. We are going to look at what are those motivation triggers that people use to get interested in something, to be motivated, how they think, how they make decisions. You're going to find out the questions to use so that you can uncover those motivational triggers. And you'll find out the influencing language both to use with them and to avoid. Okay? Today we're also going to cover some of the buying signals. So how you can tell if your client is ready to say yes before they are even consciously aware themselves that they've already made a decision. That would be useful, wouldn't it? And you're also going to get a cheat sheet. You know that lie we tell ourselves, "I don't need to write that down. I'll remember that." How many of you tell that lie? I tell that lie all the time. So you'll have a cheat sheet that you can use so that you don't have to try and remember all this stuff. You know, it's important not to believe everything I say up here, because I think you need to try this out for yourself to see if it works. And you're going to get an opportunity today to try some of this out. And by the way, this material comes from my first two books, Words That Change Minds and The Customer Is Bothering Me. And I chose that title because it reminds me of the Canadian customer service philosophy. Yes, I thought it was funny too. But apparently it's not that funny when you really think about it. Yeah. So, different people, of course, respond to different words. And someone can be in front of the exact right potential client, but if they inadvertently use the wrong words with that person, they're going to get very little response. But if you can find the right words with the right people, then they're going to be very engaged, and you're going to get a positive response. And the secret is, people show you and tell you what motivates them, both in the language they use and in their behavior. Let's try this out. Here's an example. Let's imagine that you are searching on the internet for a pair of rain boots. You really need a pair of rain boots, okay? And you come across a little company called Bob's Rain Boots. The question is, which of Bob's Rain Boots ad are you the most likely to click on? Let's look at the choices. Number 1, keep your feet dry, Bob's Rain Boots. Number 2, avoid getting wet feet. Bob's rain boots. Number 3, want to keep your feet dry? Bob's rain boots. Number 4, gotta keep your feet dry. Bob's rain boots. Number 5, ways to keep your feet dry. Bob's rain boots. And lastly, number 6, how to keep your feet dry. So you're really looking for a pair of rain boots. Which ad do you click on? Which is the most likely you're going to click on? Turn to the person next to you. Tell them which ad is it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. Right now. Tell your person beside you. What are you going to click on? Oh, my feet are getting wet. Oh, I want to keep them dry. Which one am I going to pick? So, I just want to check how many people picked number 1. Show of hands, look around the room. Lots of people really want to keep their feet dry. Great. How many picked number 2? Look around the room. A few little people picked their room. Okay, we're going to look at what that means in a few moments. How many people responded number 3? Want to keep your feet dry? Oh, a big bunch of people. And number 4, you got to keep your feet dry. Ooh, 3, 4. It's interesting. We're going to explain this in just a moment. And how many people picked number 5? Ways to go. Oh, that tells me a lot about you. You'll know in a moment too. And number 6, how to keep your feet dry. Okay, you can see, look at the spread in different answers. So what are we talking about here? So we're looking at different motivation triggers that show up in language. So the first motivation trigger is something we call towards. Now, very careful, this is not a personality profile. This is a motivation trigger. So it doesn't describe you in all circumstances. It only describes you in the context of looking for rain boots. And someone who has a towards motivation trigger has a goal, and they want to benefit. And in this case, they want to keep their feet dry. But not everybody is goal-oriented. Not everybody wants to meet a goal. In fact, in the context of work, more than 40% of the population are not motivated by goals. What they're motivated by is moving away from a problem. So that means avoiding it, preventing it, or solving it. And it's not about negative thinking, it's about moving away from a problem. And those people, in the context of rain boots, they're picking avoid getting wet feet. Does that make sense? All right. Now, number 3, this is a bit more subtle. Notice the phrasing in the ad. You want to keep your feet dry? It's asking a question, because this appeals to people who want to decide for themselves. Don't tell me what to think, I'll decide. You don't have any clients like that, do you? That they may not know anything about financial planning or anything else, but they don't want to be told what to do. Think about your spouse. Think about your teenagers. They don't want you to tell them what to do. So someone who's in an internal mode, they want to be asked, do you want to keep your feet dry? Right? Now, someone who is in more of an external mode, they might say, well, I don't know what to do. What do you think? They're more external. And if you have credibility, you can tell them what to do. If you don't have credibility, I wouldn't do that. It's not very helpful. So you have to make sure you have credibility before you tell people what to do. I mean, you've tried this out for yourself in your own families. You've told them what to do, and you've seen the results. So number 6, ways to keep your feet dry. This appeals to people who want lots of choices. They don't want one way to keep your feet dry. They want lots of ways to keep your feet dry. And they want to think outside the box. We're going to look at this in more detail. And number 6, it's what we call procedures. These are people who want one right way. They want a process, beginning, middle, and end. They don't want to deviate. They know there's a right way to do it, and that's what they want. So some of you know there's a right way to have rain boots. Am I wrong? So what are we looking at here? We're looking at a set of patterns that come from my book, Words That Change Minds, and it just came out in Chinese last year, which is very cool because I was very curious as to how the linguistics worked in Chinese. It comes from a profiling tool called the Language and Behavior Profile. For short, we call it the lab profile, because people's language gives you a predictive ability on their behavior. How they speak is reflected in how they behave. And the language you use can either go to someone's bus stop or be in completely different places, just like you learned with Courtney in the last talk. So we're going to look at the language patterns of that. The very first motivation trigger we're going to look at is what's important to you. What does somebody want? So that's their values, their criteria about how they make decisions. And the second pattern that we look at is how can you tell if they're trying to avoid a potential problem in the context in which you talk to them? Do they want to move away from what could be an issue? Or do they have a goal that they're moving towards? If you don't know this about your client, you may inadvertently use goal language when that's not what's motivating them. So you need to be able to pick this up. Thirdly, do they want to decide for themselves? If they want to decide for themselves, the way to present information is completely different than if they want to be guided. And the kind of information that you need to propose to them will be very different indeed. And again, do they want a straightforward step-by-step process, or do they want a range of options? I'd like to give you some examples today of different organizations and some advertising slogans where you can see how this shows up in people's work and when they make decisions. The very first thing I want to talk to you about is criteria. Those are the values. Those are the things that people say that motivate them deeply. And these are hot buttons. What do I mean by hot buttons? Hot buttons are specific words and phrases that incite a physical and an emotional reaction. Now, don't believe me, okay? Think about your family. Everyone in your family knows your negative hot buttons. They know that all they have to do is say this and you will explode. Like it's just some words, right? Like what's going on with there? And if you have kids, they spend all day long pushing their siblings' hot buttons to see if they can get them to explode. Like, what? You felt so emotional about some words? Well, people actually use specific phrases and words. They repeat them and they stress them, and that's an indicator that this is a highly held value for them. And if someone accidentally steps on someone's criteria or their values, it hurts deeply. So think about times when you tried to say something important to someone else and they dismissed it. You know how that feels. So one of the very important things that financial planners need to do is find out what those are. Right? Now, I remember a few years ago when my kids had finally left home. Did I say finally? When my kids had finally left home, and I decided I wanted to get rid of my mummy-mobile. You know, the stinky old mummy-mobile with the leftover smell of sports equipment and hockey bags. You know, we're in Canada here, so I don't have to explain the smell of a hockey bag, right? And it was rusty, and I didn't buy a new car for ages because I was just waiting till I didn't have to deal with that anymore. And my husband and I, now my husband is a German engineer. He lives in Berlin, and we go back and forth. He and I went out to buy me a car. I wanted a luxury car. So of course we had to go to all the German dealerships first. Natürlich. And what shocked me is out of the 7 dealerships we went to, because we went to others than Germans as well, although when we went into the American dealerships, he grumbled. I was shocked that out of all these professional salespeople, only one of them asked me, Shelle, what do you want in a car? What's important to you about this car? Now, the BMW guy, he went to the trouble to explain to me the philosophy of the BMW. Do you know the philosophy of BMW? Well, you're about to find out. So he said, okay, the philosophy of the BMW is feel the road. I thought, is he looking at me? Is he looking at me? Because I had a list. On my list was, my car needs to drive like honey. That's kind of the opposite of feel the road. So it had to drive like honey. I wanted to be hugged by my new luxury car. I wanted a place to put all my lady things in the car, which there is never any place to put your lady things in the car. You've noticed that, right? And I wanted to be able to close my car, look around the parking lot, and decide that my car was the most beautiful car in the parking lot. Okay? I mean, fairly simple things I wanted, right? So maybe it wasn't a coincidence, or maybe it was, that the only person who said to me, Shelle, what are you looking for in a car? What's important to you? That's the person who sold me a car, right? And in your financial planning process, in a normal sales process, you need to start with that. Courtney called it purpose, right? It's so important because this is the gut level emotional things that make us decide yes or no about what we want, okay? It's the core, it's the heart of the matter. So you want to know what car I bought, right? It's the most beautiful car in any parking lot. This is me taking reception of my A4. You'll notice it is blue. Apparently this is Aruba blue. Now, some people here have informed me that I am wearing cobalt blue, which I wasn't quite sure of how you call this blues, but the car is Aruba blue. So there you go. And you can see how important criteria really is. Now, here are the questions you need to embed in your process to find out criteria. And there's some issues with these questions. So the first question is, what do you want? And then you put the context. What do you want with regards to retirement savings or with regards to investments? Now, there's a problem with this question. Many people in Canada and in Northern Europe, because I work in a lot of different countries, have a hard time answering the question, what do you want? And they kind of look like teenagers. If you ask this question, they go, I don't know. Have you seen that? The shoulder, I don't know. And it's because in this culture, we're much more accustomed to thinking about issues and problems. So the question I like to ask, if that first question, what do you want, doesn't work, is what is important to you, and then the context. So don't believe me. Try this out with your clients. What do you want? Watch what happens. And if that is harder to answer, say, well, do you know the dog whistle look? It's the look that dogs get when somebody blows a whistle. Normally human beings can't hear this. So here's the dog whistle look. So ask them, well, what's important to you about your financial investments or about preparing for retirement or whatever the context is that you're working with your clients? And they will begin to talk. And it may take a little while, but those are the questions. Write down what comes out because those words and those phrases are criteria phrases. And if you paraphrase, you don't create the same experience for your client. You know, if somebody asked me, Shelle, what do you want in your work? What's important to you in your work? And one of the strongest things that comes out for me is I want to do work that makes a difference. So if somebody were to play back to me, so you want to help people, that does nothing for me. Right? So the words people choose, they choose them because they have a resonance. And in fact, it goes back to your past. You know, the fact that I want to make a difference is a label I've stuck on all the best work experiences from my past. It's a label I'm sticking on the most fun projects, the best projects now, and it's the ones I predict in the future where I'm going to get to make a difference. That's what's exciting for me. So it's really quite important that you know the exact phrasing, verb tenses and everything, and listen for it to be stressed and repeated for you to know that that's a criterion for your client. You know, have you ever had the experience where you've answered somebody's question on the phone, but they keep going round and round and round again? Sometimes that can be because they didn't hear their words coming out of your mouth. Right? So that's criteria. That's the content area. So now let's look at the motivation triggers that have to do with everything except content. You see, the criteria is what is important to a person. The other motivation triggers we're going to look at now are all the motivation directions, what they do with that to get motivated or unmotivated, okay? Some people are motivated towards. So you can see in the image here, the motivation is the goal. Some people are actually motivated by a goal. And they want to hear benefits from that. They want to hear how you're going to help them get there. Some people are not interested in that so much. Some people are interested in moving away from a problem, not having to deal with it anymore. And in the area in financial planning, from some of the research I've done from some of the financial organizations in Canada, Canadians tend to be more away from about investments. They don't want to be poor. They don't want to end up not having enough money. They don't want this, they don't want that. All that kind of language is an indicator of an away from pattern. Now, imagine if you're talking about the benefits of something to someone who wants to move away from, they can't hear you. It's not meeting their needs. So you need to show them how you can prevent a problem from happening, both in your marketing as well as in your one-on-one conversations with your clients. So the language to use if someone is moving toward is, here's the benefits. This is what you'll gain. This is what you'll get, right? Now, you can test this. Don't believe me. Use benefits language and watch your client. If you can knock, but nobody is home, this language is not doing it for them. All you have to do is look, because that means if you can't see anything going on here, it means they left the room. Right? You can see that in meetings where you look around the room and you can knock, but nobody's home, right? So flip the pancake and begin to use language about, well, this way you won't have to worry about X, Y, Z. Okay, we're going to look at a strategy so this and this problem won't occur or is less likely to occur. Right? So it's really important to figure out whether your client wants to move towards something. They've got a strategic goal and they want to get there, or they absolutely don't want to have certain issues. And listen to the direction of movement in their language. I want X. I certainly want to avoid this. Avoid, prevent, solve. Okay? Here's some examples. This is a very toward cat. This cat did not think about what could go wrong if it stuck its head in a beer glass. It was just going for the beer, right? When someone's in a very toward mode, and this again, it's contextual. This is not a personality profile, it's contextual. You could have a toward trigger when you want to go away on vacation and you want to go do things, whereas other family members just want to get away. They don't care where they're going. And by the way, you need to talk about that because it'd be nice if you were in sync about what was the purpose of a vacation, right? So that's a very toward cat. That's when you're so goal-focused, you don't think about what could go wrong. Pro-age by Dove. Very interesting slogan. Would you say it's toward or away from? It's toward. Okay, now let's think about, what do most women think about with regards to this kind of product? Don't want wrinkles to show. Don't want my skin to look haggard. What kind of language is that? Right. You see, some people mistake toward and away from positive and negative, but it's not the same thing. It's direction of movement. Going towards, now I don't know about you, but most of the women I know are not going towards age. In fact, I bought the 10-year Canadian passport, and I call it my pre-wrinkle passport. Because by the time it's up, it's still going to be looking really good, unlike the owner of the passport. So you can see, when you know these below-conscious triggers, see, most people aren't aware of them. Most people don't choose the language they use, they just talk. But when you have eyes to see and ears to hear, you can begin to see what is motivating someone. So that's an example right there. Here's another example, and you can see me, if you look in this screen, me out there with my camera taking a picture, and in the background, what do you see there? A beautiful Aruba blue Audi A4. So it's, I'm out taking pictures of all this kind of stuff. Home hardware. Do it yourself doesn't mean you have to do it alone. Now, is this a slogan that's toward or away from? Thinking about it. It's away from. You don't have to be alone. You're not on your own, right? So for everybody who's worried about trying to do something by themselves, this tells them you don't have to worry about that. So look at the direction of movement in the language. That's what's important. This is a book by a buddy of mine. He helps organizations with decisions, and he's written a book about future scenarios and how organizations and people can prepare for the future. And he was sitting with a bunch of us. He said, I need help with a title. So one of the key questions, and I want you to remember this question, because if you're marketing or you're selling, you need to think about this question. Stand back. Who is going to get the most benefit from your product or your service? So we asked him, who's going to get the most benefit? Somebody who's looking forward to the future and wants to prepare it, or somebody who's afraid of the future and is worried about what might happen? So now he's thinking about the content of his book, and he said, well, what do you think he decided? People who are worried about the future are the ones who are going to get the most of the book. So the title is The Prediction Trap. The trap is not something you want, and how to avoid it. Now, we can't help doing the things we do. My friend Randy likes to be goal-oriented. So you can check out the subtitle at the bottom in yellow there, Prepare Now and Prosper, Prosper Now and Prepare for the Future. So we've got a little toward in there. And some people say, Shelle, isn't it better to do both? It's actually better to do a bit of research on your clients and figure out the services and products you have. Do they fit both, one or the other? I did some research with some Google ads for a very tiny company. This is a man who builds sunrooms for people, designs and builds sunrooms. And he showed me his ads, and I said, all your ads are toward get more light in your house. Do you know for sure that people want sunrooms because they want to get more light? So we did an experiment. So we said, are you tired of living in the dark in the wintertime? And we did a bunch of ads about getting away from and toward, and we did a whole Google test. And what was interesting in his case, it was about 50-50. That's an exception. In my experience in working with companies to help them uncover what their customers want, usually it's one or the other. Now, in a very big room full of people, though, which is a different context, what do you think's going on? Well, some people are thinking about problems to avoid, and some people are thinking about what they want to get. So it's important to use both languages. Demonstration alert! So when you understand if your target market is moving toward or away from, you can avoid making a whole bunch of mistakes, right? You won't have to apologize later. Catching what I'm doing. And you'll have better rapport and better trust because you're on the same wavelength. Right? I want you to notice that I'm going to be doing this all the way through, and maybe you'll catch me in the act of avoiding issues and achieving goals, because it's happening all the time, and you don't want to miss it, right? You want to make sure you catch it when I do it, right? Okay. So this is me running down Yonge Street with my camera. So sorry for the bad quality of the picture. I couldn't help myself. Okay, so what kind of language is this? This is discount car and rentals, more open road, less open wallet. What are they doing here? Both! More open road, less open wallet. But the image is one particular pattern. It's an image of a wallet locked up in chains. What's that? Toward or away from? Away from. You don't have to open your wallet, right? So maybe you want to start walking around with your camera and catching all the examples of this. So the question to find out whether somebody is moving towards or moving away from, first of all, you need to find out their criteria. I want to have enough money when I retire. Then you ask, why is that important? And there's really only a couple of ways people answer. I want to have enough money in my retirement so I can do all the things I wanted to do. What kind of language is that? Or they might say, well, I want to have enough money for retirement because, my parents weren't very well off, and we came from a country where nobody was well off, and I don't want to have to worry about paying my bills at the end of the month. You need to really listen to the direction of movement in the language. And sometimes it helps to ask that question a couple of times. So I'm really glad, Courtney, that you brought that question up because it gives a lot of layers of information, right? Because I want a goal or I want to avoid a problem, right? Very simple questions you can build into your normal procedure. Now, then, as we talked about before, there's those people who want to decide for themselves. Again, it's contextual, right? Someone who's internal, they decide based on what's important to them, and they probably have a list of criteria, right? And they do not want to be told what to do. Now, one of the very worst things you can do to break rapport with someone who's in internal mode is to be enthusiastic. right? And you know, this is a problem, because if you're not enthusiastic, do you not really believe the things you're talking about? But you need to be enthusiastic for yourself and invitational for other people. Because at a below conscious level, when you say to somebody, oh, this is fantastic, what happens to them if they're internal? At a gut level, maybe outside their awareness, or maybe they are aware of this, they're thinking, don't tell me what to think. I want to decide for myself. You know, like somebody says, oh, you got to go see this movie. It's the best movie. Now, unless they have impeccable taste, according to you, you go there and you think, well, it was okay. And it's because at a gut level, many people don't want to be told what to do. And in my book, The Customer is Bothering Me, I talk about the great customer attitude shift. You know that joke that we've been telling for decades about Canadians? How do you get 25 Canadians to get out of a swimming pool? You ask them to get out of the pool. You know, that means they're external if that's happening, right? You know, by the way, I lived in France for 7 years, and it occurred to me there's a French version of that joke. How do you get 25 French people to get out of a swimming pool? You tell them, you must stay in the pool. They're all out. It's a don't tell me what to do kind of culture. So someone who's internal wants to decide for themselves. Someone who's external wants some external guidance. But here has what has happened, and it's something I call the great customer attitude shift, where large numbers of people who used to do whatever they were told, line up over here, fill out this form, call that person, don't want to do that anymore. They don't want to be told what to do. They don't want to be told, well, you're going to have to call the office, or you're going to have to write a letter. They don't want to be told what to do. So even if they're not very knowledgeable, they want to be invited. They want to have suggestions for them to think about. And this means the language and what you talk about needs to shift. So if your clients are very internal, my suggestion, listen very carefully, my suggestion is to use the language of suggestion. Invite them to think about it, right? You know, in marketing, we always talk about you got to have a call to action. Well, guess what? If your call to action is too enthusiastic and too definitive, it turns off anyone who's internal, right? On websites, et cetera. They want to be invited to act. Would you like to learn more? Question mark. It's going to get a lot more of people who are in internal mode to click than Windows closing, click here. Right? So even think about it when you're talking. Now, someone who's in external mode, they don't have the criteria in their body. They're looking for the outside criteria. And they'll say, well, what do you think? Right? Do you think this is going to work for me? And the key is assume everyone is internal to you until you get proof to the contrary. And you'll know you've done a great job at establishing trust and credibility when your clients go external to you and they say, oh, do you think this is what I need? Oh, that sounds good. When they become external to you, they shift. Now, if they shift back into internal and you make a suggestion like you usually do, and all of a sudden they go, oh yeah, well, why do you think that? It means they've become unhappy with you for some reason, and you now need to find out what it is, because they've shifted back into, don't tell me what to do, I'll decide. And I've done some work with a venture capital firm in London, and I work with their portfolio team, because the portfolio team, as you know, goes into these newly acquired companies, works with the executive team, the founders, the owners, to help them improve performance. Well, imagine if a hot young MBA with all the knowledge on CRM walks into, I said CRA, isn't that a little slip of the tongue here? CRM walks in and says, here's what you got to do. That isn't going to fly. So they're learning this language so they can go in and work well with these founders who are highly internal and highly attached to their companies. Let's look at some slogans and business slogans that are internal and external. Took this in an airport. Who is this aimed at? People who are internal or external. 97% of the global Fortune 500 use Oracle. Get better results with Oracle. Is this for people who are internal or external? External. This is what I call command language. Everybody else is doing it. You should do it, right? And that's not going to work with a lot of people. Here's another one. Now, I'm sorry about the image. I was on the 12th floor in a hotel in London you can't actually get out a window for the 12th floor of a hotel, but I almost did. This is an advertisement to get people to join the British Civil Servants Union, right? So this is the British QP. Look at the language. 1 million voices for public services. I've added mine, add yours. Who's this for? Internals or externals? Externals, command language. Everybody's doing it. You gotta do it. Right? Does that make sense? How many of you are turned off by that? Right. And this is contextual. It's not about personality. It's context, context, context. Here's another one. You know, Winners, right? Now, who shops at Winners? Mainly women, with the following exception. Except for the husband in the grumpy husband chair, right? Who's looking at his watch. You know, I don't understand why retail organizations, who a lot of them are in trouble, do not understand how important the grumpy husband is in the grumpy husband chair. I mean, if I were them, I would have a really nice sofa, a TV, and drinks and snacks. Wouldn't you? But usually they put it right by the changing rooms, right? And it's dumpy and it's dusty, and all he can think to do is get out of there. Right. But we're not going to talk about the grumpy husband and the grumpy husband chair for a moment. Let's talk about the demographic who shops at Winners. Let's zoom out and think about what would motivate this group of people to want to try a new store that sells clothing, accessories for the home, that kind of thing. What makes this group of women want to try a new store? Their friends tell them. And a long time ago, because most people don't know about these patterns because they're so unconscious. They had a whole series of television commercials in which they showed all the things they have, and there's new stuff coming every week. And then, and this was brilliant, the voiceover was a woman's voice using that secret tone of voice. You know, that tone of voice means, I have a secret. And the language was perfect for this demographic. The voiceover said, you should go. Isn't that perfect? It's perfect. Commandments, because we tell our girlfriends the best places to go for stuff, right? And we don't say, you may wish to consider going to Winners. We don't do that. You gotta go. And usually we're external to each other in that context. So my point is here, there's not one right way or wrong way. You need to know where that bus stop is. Where is that bus stop? Now, to avoid disasters, I like to assume everyone's internal, to avoid accidentally being too commanding and too bossy. How many of you can be bossy at times? I want to give you the cure when you just let it slip out of your mouth and then you realize you've just had a bad impact. Have you ever done that? You should do this. And you realize the other person's all ready to have a fight. You just erase what you said. And you do that by saying, oh, that's not what I meant. I wanted to run an idea by you to see what you think. Right? So you just erase it. You say, that's not what I meant. Now, if you're a politician, you say, errors were committed. Errors were made. That's my joke about politicians. Errors were made, but not by me. All right. Which is the title of a great book, by the way. Okay, here's a slogan for Carlsberg. Who's going to love this slogan? Probably the best beer in the world. This is pretty subtle. What does the probably invite you to do? Decide for yourself. This makes it kind of irresistible for you to try it, to see if you agree. If they had said, Carlsberg, certainly the best beer in the world, you would have gone, oh, stop telling me what to do. Right? So this is why language is really important, and there's really subtle differences. eHarmony. You know, this is the place where you can find the love of your life, like millions of other places. A few years ago, and eHarmony is known for doing psychological tests and matching people like to like, et cetera. And a few years ago, they had this particular slogan that they're not using now. Is it for internals or externals? When you're ready to find the love of your life. It's for somebody who's internal. They don't want to be told what to do. I decide when I'm ready, then I'll come to you. They would get an entirely different market of people if their slogan was, we'll show you how to find the love of your life. Right? It would turn off a bunch of people. And quite a few years ago, I did some work, some research for an outplacement office. So managers who were being downsized would go through this process of discovering what was interesting for them and helping them find a new job. Okay, that was their business. And I looked at their marketing materials and I said, you know, your marketing material is primarily aimed, and your sales process, at highly internal people. Their sales process was they talk to you, they ask lots of questions, and then they give you a package and suggest you go home and think about it, right? If someone's external, they don't know how to go home and think about it because they're not sure if it's right for them. But someone who's internal will take it and go home, go through it, see if it meets their criteria, and then decide. So I pointed this out to them, and I said, there's a whole other market of people who need guidance, but your marketing would have to be different. You would have to be a little bit more assertive, a bit more commanding, and say, we know the way to go. So guess what happened? You're going to laugh. Well, I laughed. The CEO went away and thought about it. What's an indication of that? What does that mean? Internal, came back and said, no, we're quite happy with the clientele we have. If we get that other clientele, we're going to have to double our staff to take care of them. Right? So you can decide. I mean, that's either good or bad or right or wrong, but you can decide, and your marketing and your sales process is already deciding for you who's likely to say yes, who's likely to get on your bus, and who isn't. It's already deciding for you. Here's another one. This is, I saw this on a sign near where I live, just outside of Hamilton. It's 40 Creek Whiskey, internal or external. Tell the person next to you, what do you think it is, internal or external? I want to hear what your guesses are. Tell the person beside you, internal or external. Rated number 1, tonight you be the judge. And then a list of the prizes. How many of you said both? Yes, you got it right. You win a prize. I don't know what the prize is, but you won it. Rated number 1. Who cares about that? Someone who's external goes, oh, wow, they were rated number 1. And look at all the prizes they've got. But then in black and bold, it says what? Tonight you be the judge. So they've really successfully gotten both there. They've really successfully gotten both. But again, you need to think about who are you generally speaking to, right? So last motivation trigger. Someone who is in a procedural mode, they are motivated to have a step-by-step process. And here's what happens to them. When they start a process, they want to have a clear-cut process, and they are motivated to get to the end of the process. They want to finish what they start. It's really, really important. And they have a set of beliefs. When you're in a procedural mode, you believe there's only one right way to do something, step by step by step. Right? You don't want to be thinking about alternatives. You just want to know the right way to do it. Now, if you work with a bureaucracy, it's really important for you to use procedural language. Have you ever noticed that if you ask, it may not be only a government bureaucracy, but if you ask someone who works in a bureaucracy, is it possible to do X? It is never possible, because possible is not procedures language. Possible is about options, which is about choices. And when someone has an options motivation trigger, okay, if you salivate when I say this, this may be because you have this trigger, at times at least. Someone who has an options trigger likes to break the rules. Color outside of the lines. Now, if you're going, I don't think so, it's just not your pattern. Some people are options cooks. That means they decide one day to follow a recipe, and they download the recipe, and they look at it. And if they're actually really an options cook, this is what happens. They start to follow a recipe, but then they can't help themselves, and they start making substitutions. When someone's in an options mode, they're motivated to have lots of choices and lots of alternatives. But the problem for salespeople is people stay in an options mode. They are unlikely to make a decision, because making a decision means eliminating all the other options. They don't like that. So part of the sales process is to show someone options, but then take them through a buying process. A process is a procedure. It has a beginning and a middle and an end. right? And you can see you have different kinds of customers. If you are working with a couple, one of them might be into exploring the alternatives, and the other one might be saying, well, what's the right way to do this? And you'll hear both languages. You know, when I first met my husband, my German engineer, and he invited me to his place in Berlin, he showed me the procedure for stocking the dishwasher. I kid you not. And of course, my first reaction, because I'm aware of these patterns, was, I don't think this relationship is going to have legs. But then, 12 years later, well, and actually I thought about it. You know, your kitchen does need to be procedural, because I went back home with me and my kids, and we had kind of an options kitchen, which meant if you want to cook something, you had to find where the last person put the stuff away, right? I mean, that takes a lot of time. You know people who have options patterns around their keys. They never put it in the one right spot for their key. So if they have a big handbag, you know what they do. Looking for your keys, right? That's options. Whereas I have a procedural handbag. There is only one right place for my keys. You know, and a little later, my husband took me out because I wanted to buy a camera. Never got a camera because he kept showing me all the other options. So about technology, big options guy. So what language do you need to use with procedures and options clients? The next step. Here's the right way, here's the procedure, and the key word is how. So if you're working with a bureaucracy and you want to do something, that's the question you ask, not is it possible? You say, what is the procedure for doing X? Or how do you do X? Because if somebody works in a procedure, they need to hear that procedural language. That's how you go to their bus stop. Now, of course, someone who's in an option mode, they're going to be asking you, what else? Is there another way? Let me show you some alternatives. And if they're really excited, again, you always need to look. If they're excited about alternatives, you know they're in an options mode. What's the difference between, well, that's one way to do that. Is that options or procedures? It's options. But if you say that's the way to do it, that presupposes a procedure. So let's look at a couple of examples. Groucho Marx, who you may remember. Groucho Marx had an options approach to ethics. He said, and I quote, "Those are my principles. And if you don't like them, I have others." I'm not making any more comments about that. There are ethical implications for that, as you know. This is what happens when the Department of Highways has an options trigger. By the way, if you are ever giving instructions to someone, don't give them options because they get lost. Well, you could go this way or this way or this way, and I go, right? If you're giving someone instructions, they need a step-by-step procedure, they can't follow it. Okay, I'm going to show you a picture of what happens when the municipal road crew has a very highly procedures motivation trigger, and they are determined to finish the tasks that they started. This is what you get. Aww. You know, I show this picture in Europe, and they have no idea what animal that is. You know what animal that is, right? It's a possum. That's right. It's a very old picture. Look at the cars, right? It's like when you watch movies, you can tell what date the movie is from how big the phones are. Somebody sent me this from South Africa, and I'm not quite sure. Is this options or procedures? Or is it like mainly procedures with a little bit of options, right? Or is it just I can't be bothered getting out of the truck? Yeah. Moors clothing for men. The target market for Moors are people who don't understand clothing. They just need a suit. They don't want to consider criteria and all the choices for suits. They just want to get a suit. So visually, this ad is very, very procedural, and it calls their target market at a gut level. And I don't know if they did this on purpose, but even the slogan, and we all know it in Canada, well made, well priced, well dressed. Bum, bum, bum. And this image is very, very procedural. And at a gut level, it calls exactly the right target market. So Pier 1 imports, has anybody been in there? Now, how many of you hate Pier 1 imports? Can I see? Okay. So that tells me that in the context of shopping for furniture and decorative items for the home, you probably don't have an options pattern. I mean, don't believe me. Go and look at a Pier 1 store. At the door, there's a minimum of 3 aisles. What does that mean? Options, that's right. And so you wander around the store, and let's say there's candles here, but there's candles there. There's chests of drawers over here. They might be over here. And God forbid, if you find the thing you want to buy, what is the next challenge? Finding the cash register, because it's not at the end of some place, right? Now, you're all going to know, who are we going to compare that with? IKEA, right? The hyper-procedural store for all time. There are right with, and you remember when they used to have little footprints to make sure that well, I'm sure that since they did that, they might have had people screaming, like I always wanted to push the fire alarm just to get out. Because I'm internal, I don't want to be told what way to go in the store. Now they have shortcuts, right? And their staff has been primed to let you go in the shortcut. So you can say, I need this shortcut. Now, I went to IKEA in Berlin with my Misha and his son Felix, and I was struck by this. It's such a procedural buying experience that IKEA in Berlin was identical in every way to IKEA in Burlington, Ontario. And I knew if I concentrated very, very hard, when I went out the door, I could be home in Canada. So having had this revelation, this insight, I posted on Facebook, I think IKEA is a portal to the universe. And then one of my friends, smart friends, posted back, I period, K period, E period, A period, E period, I period, help me out here, K period, E period, A period. And then she explained it. I can exit anywhere. Wouldn't that be cool? Now, if I were IKEA, I would be definitely watching on social media for this kind of stuff to show up, but they weren't, right? So here's the question you need to ask to find out if your client is in options or procedures mode. How are they driven? Ask them about the last time they made decisions about the thing you're talking about. So if it's investing, why did you choose your last retirement savings strategy? Or why did you choose your last financial planner? And there's two ways people answer this question. If they say, well, I didn't really choose, or if they tell you a story, they're in procedures mode. Because the structure of all stories, except Jewish stories, I'm Jewish and they don't follow this structure, but most stories have a beginning followed by a middle, right? And ending on the end. That's a procedure, beginning, middle, and end. Remember, procedures, people like to get to the end of the story. So if they tell you a story, well, my bank recommended that I worked with this person, and so we ended up working with her for a while, and then she retired. That's a story. It's a series of events. If they tell you a story, they're in procedures mode. Okay, but if they don't tell you a story, but they give you a list of criteria, why did you choose your last financial planner, for example? Well, I liked him. He seemed to know what he was talking about. His strategies made sense to me, and I could understand what he said. If they put it on their fingers, that's a list. That means the person's in options mode. They're thinking about why, they're not thinking about how. So how do you tell if your customer is ready to buy? Well, if your customer is still using options language, like they still want more alternatives, have you got anything else? What else would be suitable? Or do you have any more information? Sometimes clients just want more information. Do you have any more information? They're still in options mode, which means everything is a possibility. They're not ready to close it down and make a decision. But there's something you can do and something you can say to test if they're ready to go to that next step. The word next step is procedures, by the way. And that's what you do. So if they are already in procedures mode, they will ask you what's next. But if they're not, you say, shall we look at the next step? Don't say steps with a plural, just say the next step. Because if you put an S on it, then it sounds like options all over again. So you've shown them a number of options to meet their needs. Test if they're ready to make a buying decision by saying, shall we look at the next step? And if you hear them switch, okay, what's next? What's going to happen now? They've already made a decision to buy. Right? And that's how you can tell where they're at. So let's go back to our Bob's rain boots for a moment. If you are buying, and now you'll get a sense of where you were just about rain boots. If you pick number 1, keep your feet dry, it was towards, and the language is about benefits and what you want. Number 2, away from, avoid getting wet feet, and the language you need to use is avoid, prevent, solve. Somebody's internal, they want to be asked, they want to be invited, and that's the language of suggestion. External, you can talk about what other people are doing, or you can use what I call command language. But you have to test to make sure you have enough credibility. Because if you use command language and you don't have credibility, you will have really lost rapport then. Number 5, do they want choices, ways to keep your feet dry? Do you want pink rain boots and blue rain boots? And number 6, do you want to think about how to do something? What are the steps, step by step? So now you have a sense of your pattern with regards to rain boots. So here's my question for you. What do you want right now? Do you want to look at ways to use these lab profile motivation triggers? Or do you want to find out how you can use them in your work? How many want ways? Oh, okay, we have exactly 3 people put their hands up in a group of nearly 400 people, okay? How many people are into the next step? We want to know, okay, how do you use this? Okay, I'm going to tell you how. I want to tell you ways first. Is that okay? Can you live with ways until we get to how? Right. So one of the ways you can use this is we have developed an iPhone app. And some of you might not like the name of our app. It's called the Husband Motivator iPhone app. And because things are contextual, you can put in your husband's name and choose a context. It works on wives too, but we know who buys self-help products, don't we? Yeah. So, and you can put your husband's name in or your wife's name in. You choose a context, and then you answer questions about your husband, and it gives you a process for how to motivate your husband. That's one way. I'm into tech. I'm an angel investor, and I'm into tech. We have developed an algorithm called Libretta, piece of software. It decodes these patterns automatically in what people write. So we have 2 US patents for this, and we've embedded Libretta in email. So when your customer writes you, you can automatically get a decode and suggestions for what to say and do. So here in this one, you can see the sender wants to have many choices and alternatives, options. And it gives you a suggestion for what to do. And the more information button actually gives you phrases and what to avoid doing. So there's lots of ways to use this, right? And again, these come from words that change minds, and the customer is bothering me. You have a cheat sheet on your table, right? It looks like this. So here, you don't have to remember everything. You know that lie, I don't have to remember it, I don't have to write it down. So here are the questions you need to ask, and the ... dots refer to the context, what's important to you about your financial plan, etc. And just below that, you have the criteria and all the language that people will use and that you need to use, right? So here's our influencing and persuasion principle. It's all about going to the bus stop and remembering everything you do affects the emotional state of your customer, and everything you do determines what your customer believes about your whole organization. And before I leave, I just want to tell you about something that happened to me. This is Takayama-san, and he gave me permission to tell this story. I do a lot of work in Japan, and in March 2011, as you know, there was a big tsunami, and my programs got put off until June. And I was back to Tokyo in June, doing a sales and marketing program for business leaders. And I'd just done a rant. You know how we like to do rants? And I was ranting about, you have to know why you're essential for your customer. If you don't know, your customer's never going to take the time to work it out for themselves. What do you do that's so important for them? And I was taking a breath. I just finished my rant. And Takayama-san stood up. And this never happens in Japan. People hardly even ask any questions. And he said to me, I come from Fukushima region, and my company builds houses. And right now, no one is buying new houses. No one is buying anything, and I don't know what to do. And I don't know where this came from, probably the adrenaline from my rant. And I said to him, that's right. No one is buying new houses because they don't need new houses. And I said to him, you have to stop selling new houses. What they need now is to rebuild their lives. And I said, that's an entirely different proposition. I said to him, if you are in the business of doing what's essential to your customers, then you're talking to equipment companies to bring in bulldozers to help clear away the rubble. In June 2011, it was still 3 meters high in rubble for kilometer after kilometer. And I said to him, if you're in the business of doing what's essential to your customers, then you're going to negotiate with material suppliers to lower their prices so that people can actually rebuild. And people were very emotional, and we took a break, and then we went on with the day. And a few months later, I came back, and I was doing a Train the Trainer program to train trainers and consultants to use these motivation triggers. And there, Takayama-san is in my course. Like, what's a home builder doing in a Train the Trainer program? And you know, meanwhile, he'd friended me on Facebook and liked everything I posted, even though he doesn't speak in English. And I went up to him and I said to him, so how are things? And this is what he said to me. He said, I went home and I thought a lot about what you said. And he'd taken out a full-page advertisement in the Fukushima newspaper. And the headline he put on his ad was, do not give up hope. And he wrote a whole article underneath the headline. And he wasn't writing about the features and benefits of the houses he sold. He wrote a whole article on why it's essential to rebuild your life. And I tell you this story because you are important. You have an awful lot of power. Your work has the power to positively impact the lives of your customers. What you say and do matters. And the thing is, you never know when, and you never know who. But I hope that now you know how.